So you're thinking of running a solo campaign in D&D, but you're not sure that it'll work? Well, you're in luck, because behind today's secret door, running solo campaigns in D&D. So behind today's secret door, running solo campaigns in D&D. This is Secret Door, a channel devoted to in-depth discussion about Dungeons & Dragons, and my name is Matt Morich. All right, I have started a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the channel, your help would be greatly appreciated and much needed. The link will be in the description and in the pinned comment. And many thanks to Marcelo and Doug for your support. Okay, this shouldn't be a very long video. This is just going to be some advice that I have on running solo campaigns in D&D. I actually have an enormous amount of experience in this particular thing. A lot of my early gaming days were in solo campaigns, and then there was a big chunk in the middle that was all with big parties, and then another chunk with solo campaigns, and then big parties again. So I've played in a lot of solo campaigns, and I've run a lot of solo campaigns, and not just in D&D, but in other systems. Now, let me tell you first off that if you've never done it, if you've never played in a solo campaign, and you have the opportunity to, grab it. Playing or running or being a part of a solo campaign is one of the most interesting ways to play a role-playing game, and I'll tell you why. We get a lot of our inspiration from movies and books, and all that storytelling generally focuses on one character, not a party of characters. So when you do run a solo campaign, you have an opportunity to explore a story in a way that you can't really do with a big party. And by that I mean the party naturally has a focus that's pulled in many, many directions. In a solo campaign, it's all on that character. The player character is the main character, and you don't really get to have a main character in a party in D&D. And even if you're not going to be really story-driven in a solo campaign, it still gives the opportunity for that player to really explore their character in a way that they might not feel comfortable with in a party setting. So my first recommendation is, if you're going to run a solo campaign, you have to start asking yourself some basic questions, and you need to be pretty honest with yourself about those answers. So one of the big questions is, what is the experience level of the player? So if your player is a beginner, or it doesn't even have to be a beginner, but someone that doesn't really embrace role-playing easily, you might not be wanting to set the campaign focus on storytelling. The storytelling in a solo campaign can often make the character such an integral part of that story that if the player is not really comfortable in performance, in exploring and expressing their character, then you're going to be coming up a bit short. So if the plot of the story is just going to be other things that don't involve the character themselves, you'll be okay. So focusing the campaign in a plot kind of way will protect a beginning player or a player that is not super comfortable with role playing. Now, the other part of this, other than the story and how you're going to set it, is the difficulty itself. Playing solo D&D is a trick, and you can get into trouble really, really quickly, and there's nobody to bail you out. As a DM, you need to know that the player can get themselves in way over their heads. By the time they find out that they have, it can be way too late. So the experience that the player has, the experience with the rules, the experience with just simply playing the game, that's a very important consideration from a tactical, I guess is a good word for it, level of dungeon mastering. Naturally, of course, the encounters that you set for the player, they're going to have to be scaled to an appropriate level for the character, not just level, but the fact that they are a solo character. And that's the next big question is, do you truly want them going solo? With Tasha's, we get the opportunity to have sidekicks, and it's going to be a very attractive option. In previous editions, those roles would have been filled with henchmen or hirelings. And I had a lot of players that would really get into the henchman-hireling thing. Whenever I played, I never really did henchmen and hirelings very often. I did it like on one character. But I generally was always playing a character that wanted to do it themselves, that could do it themselves. And that's the trick. If your player is going to be playing a character that really can't really do a whole lot independently, that's going to need some help, then you're going to want to provide them with sidekicks. Now, because this is a solo campaign, don't throw like a whole full party full of sidekicks at the player. I mean, you could, I suppose. But one or two, just to give them a little bit of a cushion, is all that you really need. And so now let's talk a little bit about an encounter and how that's going to play out in a solo campaign. The number one thing that you have to be ready to deal with as a dungeon master is, what are you going to do when the die rolls go atomically bad for that player? And they will. It could be that you get on a hot streak for the enemy and they're just rolling hit after hit after hit, and the player might have a great set of defenses, but you're rolling super hot, and that player is going to get into a lot of trouble really quick. Conversely, the player could also just be rolling super cold. Now, there's not much you can do about the player running super cold, but let's go back to what happens if you're on a hot streak. If this is in melee, you need to remember that the enemy, anybody, has the option in melee of doing subdual damage. In a solo campaign, you need to remember that all the time. In melee combat, if the their character is going to drop, you need, as a DM, for them to be doing subdual damage so that they can capture the player. In reality, in a solo campaign, this isn't all that far-fetched, because when you're dealing with a party, dealing with subdual damage may not seem as obvious. It seems more like war. But when it's one particular character that's causing whatever the problem is, if it's wherever the situation is, if it's just one target, capturing that target is going to have a lot of value in a lot of situations. So what this does then is it allows you to deal with those hot rolls that you just did in a row and honor those rolls and have the player simply be captured. And this can create all kinds of problems for the player to have to deal with. Did they die? No, they didn't die. But you're not really going out of your way to save them. You are simply employing a tactic that the enemy might very well want to do anyway. And escape stories are a lot of fun. So now you have a whole new wrinkle in the game to deal with, is how is the player going to escape this particular situation? So what may at first seem to be like a bad thing happening when you're rolling hot against the solo player, it could turn out to be a blessing in disguise, because you get this cool little wrinkle in the story that you might not have thought of on your own. And that's where I'd like to talk about die fudging. Because this is, if there's ever going to be a campaign where you are, let's say you're completely against die fudging. I'm not a fan of die fudging. But if there was ever a campaign where you're going to be put to the test about die fudging, it's in a solo campaign, because it's so swingy. All those rolls, that character is standing alone. So if you are really 100% committed to never fudging die, and I fully support that idea, then you need to create avenues of escape for the player. By that I mean like things like doing subdual damage, or if you do have, let's say you don't have sidekicks that are present, there are acquaintances or friends that the character has made that could rescue the player. It's critical that you have a game plan as a DM to know what you're going to do if things completely go wrong, because it's a solo campaign. If that character dies, the campaign's over. So you don't want to have a situation where the player is going to feel that they're completely plot protected. But you also, if you're going to kill a character in a solo campaign, in my opinion, you need to be doing that because the player had it coming. They were being so dumb and so completely throwing everything to the wind and all caution to the wind and just doing whatever they felt like, that what are you supposed to do? Of course you're going to die. And then we'll just play another campaign with a new character. Maybe you learned your lesson this time. But if the player isn't being overtly stupid and careless and reckless, then as a DM, you've got to find ways to keep this campaign alive, even though the die rolls have gone horribly against the player. After all, it's not the player's fault that you rolled super crazy hot. And so my number one thing to remember, this only works in melee. You can't do subdual damage with ranged combat. So the lesson here as a DM in running a solo campaign is that because ranged combat cannot inflict subdual damage, you want to minimize the amount of ranged combat options that the enemy will have. You want to do this for another reason also. You want to give the player avenues of escape. You want them to be able to see if things are not going well, I'm going to run for it, and not have them just simply get shot in the back. So in a way, as a DM here, you have to create certain plausible points of turning the game over, switching it over to easy difficulty level for brief windows of time to allow the nature of this campaign to work. That doesn't mean that you run easy all the time. I'm simply saying in certain windows, if the player is going to do something that's intelligent and clever, you need to reward that and not punish it. All right, now I could go on and on about tactics and all that type of stuff. Let's go on to some other points here. So let's talk about some magic items. One of the great joys here in a solo campaign is that you will be able to dish out really cool magic items to that player and not have to worry about it, because, I mean, you could do some things here that you would never dream of doing in a party, where you could have a third level character find an artifact level magic item. That's something you would never do in a party, but you could do it here. And the reason you could do it here is that the whole world is already against this one character. So if they were to just get crazy lucky and find something inordinately powerful, you could do that. I'm not saying that you should, but you could. And it's very reminiscent of a lot of fantasy literature where an inexperienced character finds something of immense power. I'm sure I don't need to cite all of the examples. They're all over fantasy novels. So you would have that. That's another point that I was talking about, how you will be able to embrace the storytelling that is already inspiring D&D. You'll actually be able to fully embrace that here. So you couldn't do this in a normal campaign because it could be imbalancing. Whoever receives such a powerful magic item is obviously going to be way more powerful than the other party members, which can cause tension in a party and squabbling and squibbling and quabbling over who gets it and da-da-da-da-da. Here, you can simply have this very powerful magic item be a part of that character, a part of that story. And you don't have to worry so much about imbalancing issues, really, in a solo campaign, because it's already going to be incredibly easy to kill off a solo character if difficulty was what you were wanting to achieve. And here's the other thing. There are certain magic items in the game that you will probably almost never see in active play because they create certain problems for the DM in a party scenario. Here, in a solo campaign, you could drop one of those on a player at any point in the campaign and not really worry about it. And it would allow you to see how that magic item plays out. And magic items, powerful magic items, are a lot of fun. And believe me, as a solo player, getting something like that and knowing that you're never probably going to see something like this again, you revel in that. It's one of the great selling points of playing in a solo campaign, in my opinion. Now, I keep saying how easy it is to kill off a solo character, but there is a funny element that happens in solo campaigns. And that is that solo characters can be shockingly effective. So characters that rely on stealth, for example, in a solo campaign can be extraordinarily effective. In fact, a stealth character is, and for I think rather obvious reasons, is more effective as a solo character than if they are dealing with a party. And this kind of an effect can happen with other characters other than just stealth characters. Spellcasters can be more effective than you would guess as a solo character, even though obviously a spellcaster is extremely powerful. In a solo setting, they can do things, again, because they're not hindered by a party, that you just wouldn't obviously expect. So it's a tricky thing as a DM to deal with it, because you can quickly see players doing things that are just insanely effective, just moving from boom, 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 and you're worried about them actually taking over the world. It can get out of hand really fast. But things can go against them just like that. And you need to remember that as the DM, that you don't need to meet them. You should be letting that player have that kind of fun and feel that powerful. Throw good challenges at them. But if they can deal with it, if they can master those situations in a solo setting, then that's great. Let them do it. The difficulties will happen. You don't need to force them to happen. The whole world is against the player in a solo campaign. You don't need to add to the mix in this. Let that player have their fun and the glory in that moment. So that's something else you need to be very honest with yourself as a DM, is if you are an adversarial DM, if that's even a part of your nature, running in a solo campaign is... I can't really recommend it in the end, because you might have a good run of it for a while as an adversarial DM, but your worst instincts are going to take over and you're going to hose the player for no good reason. And that player is not going to have any other respite from it. That's something you have to also keep in mind as a DM running in a solo campaign. That player's only got their perception and their ideas to work with. A party, now this cuts both ways. That can be far more effective because they just make decisions and move. They don't have to argue about it for a half an hour to open a door or not open a door. But they also don't have the other perceptions, the other ideas of the other party members that will allow them to figure out certain puzzles or solutions to certain problems that to you, of course, are really obvious because you're the DM. But the player in a solo campaign has only got their perception of what you have told them is happening to deal with. And in a party, you have all those other perceptions that are all perceiving what you say a bit differently and will have different ideas. So you have to bear in mind when you're running that if you're going to throw puzzles and those kind of things at a player in a solo campaign, you better have some ways of lubricating that situation if the player is really struggling. So in closing here, I guess my real feeling on this is if you have the opportunity to do it, you should absolutely embrace doing it. It may turn out great. It may not turn out great. It depends on the particular player and DM in combination, of course. But when it works great, it is unlike anything else you've ever played in D&D, and it's a really fun experience. As a DM, you'll be able to be more generous than you would ever feel comfortable being in a party setting. And as a DM, it gives you an opportunity to tell a story in a way that you have not had before. And that story, if that player embraces that, it's really something. So I could go on, and if this is a popular kind of video, maybe I'll revisit this topic again at another date. But I just wanted to get the idea out there that, especially in the world that we're living in now, we're living in a world where you have a great friend that you play D&D with, and you've moved or they've moved and they don't have a game. You could just get on FaceTime or Zoom or Skype or whatever and run a game for that person. 3 hours a week or every other week or once a month, whatever. It gives you the opportunity to enjoy and connect with that friend again in a way that's deeply meaningful to both of you. And of course, it doesn't have to be a separation. It could simply be that you and your friend can't find a group. You don't need a group. You can do it with just the two of you and have a great and cool experience, unlike any other experience you've ever had before. Well, that's all I've got. If you enjoyed the video, please like, please share, please subscribe. And if you're stuck and you don't know where to go, you can always search for a secret door. Until next time, I cast bless on all of you.